To manage that at 8 years old, even looking at it today at 42, it comes close to that strange term Wunderkind.
Musical child prodigies take our breath away. The quest for musical perfection is their top priority.
My goal is to play Carnegie Hall.
The extraordinary talent often appears very early.
I first started playing piano when I was 2. I started playing and composed a whole piece.
The cliché is that child prodigies are lonely with few friends and are drilled to perfection.
Not to cry under pressure, not to shake under pressure. There are kids, 5, 6, 7 years old, who get incredible migraines after concerts. I did too.
So how much miracle is there in highly talented children? Are they born with these extraordinary abilities? We talked to former child prodigies as well as a human development researcher, a music psychologist and a music historian. German star violinist David Garrett is one of today's most successful crossover musicians. His fusion of classical and pop fills halls and stadiums around the world.
For me, music has always let me breathe, given me energy and joy. The violin was a means to an end. I was good at it. I learned to play fairly quickly. Of course, I also worked hard.
His journey with the violin began at 4 years old. Father Georg recognized his son's talent and started teaching him. David took giant steps and gave his first solo concerts with an orchestra at the age of 9.
You're very aware of all the hours you've spent on each note, that you've worked really hard for it.
Working hard on the notes is one thing, but what makes a child prodigy?
There isn't any doubt that the children have natural capabilities that are very rare. It also requires the efforts of those around the child to be equally focused and equally dedicated and equally wise about how to support and promote that talent.
David's father invested in him. His career broke records. At 13, he was the youngest musician ever to be signed by renowned classical music label Deutsche Grammophon for several albums. David has worked with stars like conductor Claudio Abbado, Zubin Mehta and violin virtuoso Yehudi Menuhin. Did it feel like a burden to you growing up?
Every day. Absolutely. No kid willingly sacrifices the time it takes to reach the top. There's always someone in the background, whether it's the mother, the father, or the teacher. One of those three is always there, slipper in hand.
What's it like to be a gifted child? Can they still have a childhood? In Petershagen near Berlin, Miles and Maddox govern the family's daily life. Simone Marsolleck is driving her sons to piano and violin lessons today, one of 7 lessons per week. She says she often gets judged.
I get labelled as a pushy mother who keeps her poor kids away from life and forces them to practice the piano and violin. I've also seen someone on Facebook say the best way to make money is with small children. People ignore the fact that it takes money, time and nerves. They see what they want to see.
Nurturing her children's talents is a full-time job for this single mother. In Berlin, concert pianist Elisaveta Blumina has been teaching Maddox and Miles for about 4 years. The boys cannot imagine living without piano and violin.
If we see, like here, that there's nothing without music, then I have to do everything to make sure that they have the groundwork to decide later if they want this or not.
Laetitia Hahn has known this focus on music since childhood. The 19-year-old has already performed on many major stages and is considered a highly gifted pianist. Her brother, 13-year-old Philip, is also a talented pianist.
In a normal week, we practice a lot. We have rehearsals, sometimes concerts. We spend 3, 4, sometimes 5 days at the university in Belgium.
The siblings are multi-talented. Laetitia started school aged 4 and finished high school at 14. She studies at a conservatory in Belgium, as does Philip. They've never known the kind of schooling that other children have.
The way I'd describe my time at school is that I always stood out. I only had to say half a sentence, and everyone knew I was a bit different.
Annette and Christian Hahn arrange their lives around their children's needs. They have to be flexible in their work hours, or intensive support would be impossible, and that takes energy.
They normally play about 60 concerts per year. Right now there are more abroad, in Japan, China and South America.
Maddox practices the piano 3 to 4 hours a day. He repeats the variations on a theme by violin virtuoso Paganini until every note is perfect. There's hardly a music competition he hasn't won, and he's accumulated more than 100 prizes so far.
I never get to the point where I'm completely happy with the way I play.
Maddox is a fast learner and has an insatiable hunger for knowledge. He needs to work on complex tasks, and even as a toddler, that was already challenging for his parents.
He got bored, which often turned into screaming and tantrums that would sometimes last for 20 minutes. You could see that he just didn't know what to do with himself. But his godfather told us he's under-challenged. He needs activity and input for his brain. He's so smart that he needs a different stimulus.
And that's where music came in. At the age of 3, Maddox played his first melodies on the piano.
It may even be, although there's no way to know this for sure, that child prodigies in music have, as a natural endowment, a preference for music as their primary way of communicating with the world, more than speech and language and more than any other area. But whether it's that or not, it's certainly very powerful, and it drives them.
At 4, Maddox was already giving his first concerts. And at 7, he played a concert at the prestigious Mozarteum Music Academy in Salzburg, Austria. Maddox and Miles have been taken out of normal schooling. It's a decision that can actually be beneficial for musically gifted children.
He grasps things faster. He doesn't need to spend 6 hours at school. He can get it done in 1 or 2. That's why we said he doesn't have to do the time in school. He can learn at his own pace when it suits him. And that also gives him enough time to prepare for concerts and competitions, since he doesn't have to spend as much time in school.
Their world is not the same as your world or my world. It's a different kind of experience, and it has to be dealt with in its own way, so that they often isolate themselves so that they can focus, and the outside world would look at that as something that is objectionable, but it may be necessary.
David Garrett's father made sure his son's childhood could be completely devoted to the violin. Music education, concerts and studio recordings were the highest priority. He got David both the best teachers and meetings with the most important decision-makers in the music industry. In his recently published biography, If You Only Knew, David Garrett describes, among other things, a childhood without children.
I was definitely an outsider. I was a child in an adult profession. It's not usually a profession done by kids. If it were, it would be called child labor. Of course, you can't call it that. But I was only surrounded by adults. I was only 13, but the conversations at the record company were with adults, with the directors, the conductors, the teachers, and the patrons after the concerts. Everyone around me was an adult.
And you never wanted to break away?
From what? I didn't even know I was in something you could break out of. I had no comparison. When you grow up in a shoebox and you don't know anyone outside of the shoebox, that shoebox is the world.
David kept exceeding audience expectations, but that didn't save him from his father's criticism.
He put a lot of emphasis on me understanding very quickly what he didn't think was good. So he always made his own recordings of the concerts. On the car ride home, we listened to it through the speakers, and of course, he immediately began voicing his criticism.
Looking back, he believes he never would have made it to the top of the ultra-exclusive classical music business without his father's perfectionism and pressure.
He made my life possible. In a hard way. But Mozart didn't have it any easier, nor did Paganini. In comparison, I was probably handled with kid gloves. They were beaten black and blue. I'm pretty sure about that.
Not every gifted musician experiences a childhood of pressure and sacrifice. Not all of them become stars, but they do have one thing in common. It's that they've always been fascinating. Throughout history, there have been many musical geniuses whose talent was considered otherworldly by contemporaries, like Bach, Beethoven, and Handel.
People were more religious in the 18th century and associated something divine with the concept of these miracle children. That sentiment is probably a bit lost on us nowadays, although the term miracle is still used to describe them. And I think it still influences our perception of this phenomenon.
One child prodigy most people will know is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Born in 1756, he wrote his first compositions at the age of 5. His father Leopold recognised his son's extraordinary talent early on and began to promote him publicly.
There's a letter from Leopold Mozart where he basically says that a miracle had taken place in Salzburg, that God had caused a prodigy to be born there. His choice of words makes me think of the Nativity story, with a kind of musical savior having entered the world. It's like Instagram. It was all fake, even back in the 18th century. He just used these stories to fill the newspapers, to create some buzz.
Creating an image.
Absolutely.
Could the whole concept of the child prodigy just be the result of a clever PR campaign? His father made a profit by taking 7-year-old Wolfgang on extensive concert tours.
There's no doubt that Leopold Mozart was a shrewd businessman. He wrote somewhere, "We must do this now because in 2 years' time this aura will be gone." The older Mozart gets, the more his child prodigy status will fade. Leopold Mozart knew that he had to act quickly.
Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, the prototype of a child prodigy, also in terms of his talent.
There's a long history, for example, of trying to portray Mozart as having had gifts that were protean across many different fields. The reality is that Mozart was unbelievably gifted in his musical talents, but he wasn't particularly adept in anything else. And that's more typical of the child prodigy.
Star conductor Daniel Barenboim made a name for himself in childhood, both as a piano player and a conductor. He was already studying conducting at the age of 10, but is reported to have once said that he was never a child prodigy. He merely got off to an early start.
To put it diplomatically, if you take someone who is wonderfully talented and combine that with a lot of work, it can come across as if it's something incredible. But once you have a look behind the scenes and you know how much work goes into it, it doesn't seem like a miracle at all that they became a child prodigy.
But how exactly can we define a prodigy? And is there such a thing as natural talent? Can any child become a musical wonder?
It's just not true that you can take any child and if you work hard enough at it, you can produce the highest levels of achievement. It just is not true.
Interestingly, a child's IQ plays little to no role in explaining musical talent. Professor Feldman defines a musical prodigy as someone who, from the age of 10, can perform at the same level as an adult professional and has the necessary dispositions.
One of those is that the child has a natural affinity for music and a natural ability to perform, to compose, or to be in the musical world. In addition, the child has to have discipline, has to have a tendency to focus and to be persistent.
The Wunderkind needs to have the potential to achieve outstanding things. However, in order for it to happen, the environment needs to be just right.
This definition of giftedness, that is, having the potential to achieve something great, is pretty much hypothetical. There are lots of ifs and buts, and you need the right conditions. Someone who has just started to play an instrument won't be pulling off a top-tier performance from the get-go. But in some cases, it is possible to see a trajectory forming and predict what the next 5 years might bring.
Behind the scenes, most child prodigies have highly invested parents. They are the ones that, with their support, see their children progress in the vital first stages of development. Would you settle for first violin, or is solo the only option?
Only solo.
Only solo. And if that doesn't work out, what then?
It'll work. And if not, well, I don't know. But why shouldn't it?
Anne-Sophie Mutter was right. She's been at the very top tier in the world of violin for almost 4 decades now. Anne-Sophie had her first violin lessons at the age of 5. Since then, she hasn't put the instrument down. Here she is at age 10.
I think if you're lucky enough to discover something early on that makes you happy and have the opportunity to do it professionally, then it doesn't really matter how long you get to be in that profession, be it 10 years or 50 plus.
Her parents fully supported Anne-Sophie right from the start and at any cost.
We spend a few thousand marks a year on Anne-Sophie's musical education. We never force anything on her. We let her develop her skills as she sees fit. She herself wants to be a violinist more than anything. Our role is to make sure that she has all the opportunities and can follow the path she wants to take.
Anne-Sophie Mutter was just 13 years old when conductor Herbert von Karajan discovered her, becoming her mentor. The beginning of a fairy tale career that continues to this day. Without the initial support of her parents, none of this might ever have happened.
The child could have all the talent in the world, and in the wrong family in the wrong circumstances with the wrong teachers, it will not happen.
The situation becomes problematic when parents live vicariously through their children. Encouragement and support can turn into drilling and coercion. The childhood of Chinese pianist Lang Lang was one marred by poverty and a despotic father hell-bent on promoting his talented son. His early years were characterised by ruthless discipline and constant fear. Japanese violinist Midori was also subject to immense pressure growing up under a strict and ambitious mother. At the age of 14, she was already working with the likes of Leonard Bernstein, but in her early 20s she suffered a mental breakdown so severe that it took a whole 6 years and several hospitalizations before she could find her way back to music.
There's always a danger in putting children under this kind of pressure. It can quite easily become detrimental and not conducive to a successful career, but individuals react to outside influence very differently. How they develop, then, is down to psychological predispositions.
But talent needs to be nurtured. The question facing parents like Simona Marsolleck: to what extent? It's undeniable that Maddox and Miles live for their music and their performances. They have toured the globe for countless concerts and competitions, be it in Israel or a competition at London's Royal Albert Hall.
Working with a prodigy is a different kind of parenting than it is for most other children. It means that, for example, a family will sacrifice living where they live and travel halfway across the world to go to the place where they believe that child will have the best opportunity.
For the single mother, caring for not one but two highly talented sons means around-the-clock support.
Piano lessons, violin lessons, singing lessons, composition lessons, and all the rest. One day you have to go and get a new bow, the next you have to go get a violin fixed. You have to prepare for concerts and competitions. It's a lot to do.
Does that leave any time for you?
No time for me.
Miles and Maddox were made for the stage, and it's already clear to them where they are headed, all the way to the top.
We'll be on the big stages soon enough. My goal is to play Carnegie Hall.
But a career isn't guaranteed in this highly competitive world. Most child prodigies say goodbye to the idea of becoming a professional musician before they reach adulthood.
You have to know what to do with that kind of talent, how to use it for something that fulfills you and makes you happy.
Today, as a young adult, Laetitia Hahn is sure of one thing: being a pianist is her calling.
I want to share my music with the world because it's what I enjoy. It's how I express myself. It's a kind of language without words. If, as a mother, I don't support my children in what they do, that's destructive, and we didn't want that.
David Garrett had to learn to withstand the daily pressure from his parents. After all, an international career in music requires perfection day after day.
Who am I to criticize how my parents raised me, when it's made my adult life so much easier? It's essentially an ethical question. Would you rather have a relaxed childhood only to struggle through the rest of life afterwards? Or do you say, okay, maybe my childhood wasn't ideal, but life got easier afterwards because of it? You answer me that.
But as a child, you can't consciously make that kind of decision on your own.
True, but I also can't look back and say it was the wrong decision. I just can't.
So what does it all boil down to in the end?
The challenge for the child prodigy and the child prodigy's family is to bring that talent to its full expression. It requires deep knowledge and understanding.
The best way to navigate a child's upbringing and education is to cultivate their self-confidence. Parents need to give their children the courage to take risks and find their own way.
The best parents and best teachers don't put the child into circumstances where that child's sense of development is distorted. It's tricky business.
Children should be allowed to enjoy being young. I do everything I can to make sure Maddox and Miles have their time off, time where they can be kids like the others.
Fate has been incredibly good to me. I've worked hard to get where I am now, but I am also aware that I've been very, very lucky. Right time, right place. My past hasn't always been easy, but I wouldn't change a single moment because it put me here today.